The Falcons signing Tua is definitely a low-risk move, but just how high is the reward?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Locked On Falcons, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. And I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Sirius Black. Been covering the Falcons for 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong here on Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And on today's daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, we'll talk about the quiet day 2 of legal tampering for the Falcons. And the reason why is because the Falcons have no more money, and we'll explain at the end of today's episode and what moves they can make in order to create more. But we'll start the conversation with what I've seen over the last 24 hours, which is a lot of people talking about Tua Tagovailoa being this low-risk, high-reward signing. And I 100% agree with the notion that it is a low-risk move, right? There's no risk, really. You know, you're paying the veteran minimum, so there's no risk when it comes to money, right? You're not committed beyond this year, so there's no risk in terms of the long-term, hamstringing your long-term future, right? And basically, the worst-case scenario is Tua gets hurt again, misses the season with like a concussion, and Penix steps in, and that's something that the majority of fans, including myself, probably would welcome, right? Not wishing injury on Tua, but just getting to a chance to get to Michael Penix sooner versus later. But the point I really push back on is the notion that this is some type of high reward move, right? Now, if by high reward you mean, Tua can be an effective game manager that can lead to the Falcons having a winning record, win the NFL's worst division, make the playoffs, and probably get bounced, by a true contender thereafter, then yes, I think that is a legit outcome for the season. But, and I think it's very valid, legitimate perspective or opinion for a fan to have that as the goal for this season, right? The Falcons haven't achieved that goal over the last 8 years, missing the playoffs, right? And even though that might not qualify as a high reward for other NFL teams, from a lot of people's perspective, if the Falcons can achieve that goal, go 9-8 and get bounced in the first round of the playoffs, that's going to get you a parade down Peachtree Street, at least for the time being. And I've talked to several fans in the last several months that are season ticket holders that have spent tens of thousands of dollars on their season tickets, PSLs and whatnot, and want that investment to finally pay off and have, the Falcons host a home playoff game for the first time in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, right? And whether, the team ultimately wins that game is irrelevant. They just want to feel the energy of a playoff game in MBS. And that's, again, a worthwhile. I empathize with that. I can't relate to that, but I empathize with it. Now, for me as a daily podcaster, right, my goal is to spend my time on a daily basis talking about a team that's a perennial playoff team, talking about a team that is a potential Super Bowl contender on an annual basis, right? And I know we talk about that now, but that's really like hopes and wishes and gumdrops and rainbows rather than like knowing that this is one of the 5 to 10 best teams in the league. That's what I personally consider would be a higher reward if the Falcons can deliver on that. And I don't see Tua delivering that, right? And I don't think that's should be the expectations on Tua. Let's be clear about that. I don't think any quarterback the Falcons could have acquired this offseason would have delivered on that. Despite all the hype that some of those guys would have gotten. If the Falcons are going to land that type of quarterback that could deliver that, that's not going to come till 2027 at the earliest. And Tua is basically just a bridge to get you to 2027, or he's a bridge to get you to Michael Penix, and you got to spend 2026 trying to figure out if Michael Penix is the guy that can deliver on what at least I perceive to be that high reward of being that sort of playoff team and Super Bowl contender, right? And to me, that's really the standard that Tua should be judged by, being a bridge. Right? Nothing wrong with being a bridge. That's why I'm not high or down on the Falcons signing Tua. It's just kind of meh because it feels like, to me at least, you kind of understand the assignment, and that's what it is. And I just wish when I see people talk about this low risk, high reward stuff, I wish people were a little bit more honest about that. It feels like people trying to gaslight people trying to put a positive spin on it. They're trying to sit here and act like Tua has the potential to be the solution to the Falcons quarterback woes by calling it a high reward situation. And to be fair to those people, maybe they don't mean it like that. They just simply mean that, Tua can go out there and win you games. And I think that's certainly a possibility. And we will spend, the bulk of the next 6 months talking about the various ways that is an achievable dream, in addition to, Penix and his future and whether or not he's the long-term answer. But that's going to get us to our next topic on today's episode, talking about Tua being that bridge and whether or not the people that are bringing Tua into the building, Kevin Stefanski and the boys, do they see him as that? Or do they see him much more as the guy that is the solution to their quarterback woes? And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. It is draft season, and yes, the draft is coming up, but we're not talking about NFL draft prospects. We're talking about 5-hour energy flavor draft, breaking down those tasty flavors, which are the best and which are the sleepers. The board is set, the flavors are ready, and only one can take the top spot. 5-hour energy has a wide variety of flavors, something for everyone. When I used to stroll into a gas station in the mornings for my old day job, I'd grab a 5-hour energy, and they just basically had the berry and grape flavors. And while those are classic flavors, they've leveled up in the year since. 17 flavors. Peach mango is now my number one prospect with its sweet tropical flavor. And I definitely want to try the confetti craze flavor, the sweet birthday cake inspired flavor with the buttery, freshly baked confetti cake flavor with that sweet vanilla frosting and the sprinkles of sweetness in every sip. So who's number one on your board? By finding out your new flavor, you can head to 5hourenergy.com or Amazon to get your favorite flavor of 5-hour energy shots today. So we are not quite fully in draft season since free agency is still ongoing. And we want to help you out by getting 1 month free of the Everydayer Club during this special time of year by using the code FREEAGENCY with no spaces at the link in the description below to join the Everydayer Club at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. You can go ad-free with the Everydayer Club. You can keep the conversation going in the Discord, talking trash to all the Saints fans that are gloating about the Saints signing Kaden Elliss today. So join the Everydayer Club by hitting that link in the description below and use that code to get a month free. So let's talk more about Tua being the bridge quarterback, right? And it's very similar to the last time the Falcons added a Hawaiian quarterback that was also the bridge quarterback. That was Marcus Mariota back in 2022. And that's part of the reason why, I'm sitting here hot and bothered about the whole Tua low risk, high reward, because I'm just like, we've done this before. He's a bridge. Let's not spin it any other way, right? But, this time it's going to be different. Like, this is my constant pet peeve here on the podcast, as you guys well know as Everydayers. But, Mariota faced a lot of backlash after that 2022 season. And I never really understood that, because I was like, he's a bridge, guys. Like, all he was supposed to be was a bridge to Desmond Ridder. Why are we sitting here getting mad that he didn't lead the Falcons to the playoffs? That was never the plan nor the goal. I know you got a taste of it when we got off to that 4-4 start and we beat the 49ers and we were first place in the division. And you're like, this is never going to end. But, I just felt like that was a lot of people not understanding the assignment. And that gets us to whether or not the current regime under Kevin Stefanski is going to understand the assignment with Tua this time around, right? And, you wonder, given Kevin Stefanski's track record, right, that you wonder, what is their goal this year? What is their number one goal? Is it either to make the playoffs, or is it to find out whether Michael Penix is the quarterback of the future? Now, depending on who you ask, you'll probably get a different answer. Now, for me personally, I tend to lean more towards the Penix side of things, right? And part of that is because I'm not particularly optimistic about the Falcons' playoff chances. But, as I often say on this podcast, that's how I feel today on March 10th. It's not necessarily how I'll feel on September 10th or January 10th. So we'll see on that front. And to be clear, I don't think there's a wrong answer to this question, right? I think it's ultimately your preference. But we probably can guess that the people in the building, Kevin Stefanski and the boys, they're here to win games. That's what they get paid to do. I don't blame Kevin Stefanski if that's how he sees it, right? Even though we sit here on this podcast saying, 2026 is an evaluation year, I don't think they think about it that way, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing, that the goal is to win games. I get it, right? That's their jobs, right? I don't blame firefighters for putting out fires. It's kind of how I view it. So, but I do wonder if we're going to have a little bit of a push-pull between those two goals all season long, right? The notion of what do we got to do to maximize our chances of winning games, and what do we got to do to also maximize our potential to develop a long-term answer at quarterback. And I feel like that's going to be an issue that's going to hang over for the entirety of this calendar year through the end of the season. And it kind of goes back to, and the reason why I think that is because it goes back to what happened in Cleveland last year, where the Browns had 4 quarterbacks: Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, and Shedeur Sanders. And I think most people knew that the Browns weren't going anywhere. And so they figured, hey, it's in the team's best interest to find out if Shedeur Sanders is the long-term answer, because he's the one guy that, at least in theory, has the upside to potentially be that guy. And it didn't feel like Kevin Stefanski was on board with that, right? And basically they went through the other 3 quarterbacks before they finally, right? They traded Kenny Pickett during training camp. They traded Joe Flacco at the beginning of the season, a month into the season. And by all accounts, that was not a decision made by Kevin Stefanski. And if it was up to Kevin Stefanski, he would have probably ridden Joe Flacco for the remainder of the season. Then they rolled with Dylan Gabriel. And only when Dylan Gabriel went down with the concussion did they finally turn the page to Shedeur Sanders. And so, I sit here and the cult of Shedeur Sanders will sit here and tell you that, like, oh, the reason why they waited so long to turn the page to Kevin Stefanski or to Shedeur was because Kevin Stefanski is, a bad guy. He's a racist and all that stuff. And I just feel, and that contributed to a lot of negativity surrounding his departure in Cleveland. But I just think that's overthinking it, right? That Kevin just wanted to win games, right? And he wanted to play the quarterback that he thought was the most effective at running his offense. That's not unique to Kevin Stefanski. We see that constantly, particularly with offensive-minded head coaches, where it's like, I got this job because of my offensive scheme, and I'm going to scheme it up, and I just need a quarterback that can go out there and execute it. I don't think that's a character flaw, right? I think that's why he was attracted to Dylan Gabriel. I think that's why he's attracted to Tua Tagovailoa. That's the selling point of Tua. If you're going to spin it that he's a high reward quarterback, it's because what you saw in Miami, where if you put the right talent, the right scheme around him, he can go out there and execute it. He can go out there and be an effective, efficient quarterback. He can be that ball distributor, right? Kirk was that way. Gabriel's that way. Tua's that way, right? You can argue Baker Mayfield was that way in his first year under Kevin Stefanski when they kind of put rails on him in Cleveland before it all sort of came apart. And I wonder if we're going to see a similar situation play out here in Atlanta, where Kevin Stefanski's, Tua is Kevin Stefanski's pick for the quarterback, and Penix simply is not. And only when Tua is fully exhausted, whatever it is, whether it's injury, whether it's, the record or whatever, will he finally turn to Michael Penix. And I wonder if that's going to be too late to really know if we can find an answer on whether or not, the question that many of us, want answered, which is Michael Penix the guy? And then we're going to go into next offseason not being any more informed on that answer than we are sitting here today. And so it kind of feels like the Falcons have to check one of those boxes at least this year, either finding out that Penix is your answer or make the playoffs. Ideally, you do both, right? Ideally, you do both. But if you're not coming away from this season checking at least one of those boxes, it's hard to conclude anything other than 2026 potentially being a failure. Now, I say that as Mr. Shades of Gray. That's a very black and white perspective to look at it, and we'll see how, it evolves over time. But all I can do is, tell you how I feel about things today on March 10th. And the way that I feel is, I'm sure some of you guys can relate to this, is I'm just kind of impatient. I'm tired of quarterback purgatory. I want to get out of this as soon as possible. And I know that there was no real way to do that this offseason, but I kind of want to get out of there next offseason, and I want to have all the information that I need to have in order to make that pivot. And it's not on Kevin Stefanski. It's not on Ian Cunningham, right? The Falcons aren't in quarterback purgatory because of them, right? They're in quarterback purgatory because the previous people, sort of put them in this hole, and now it's up to Kevin and Ian to dig themselves out of it. But we're talking about this because I just think this is the beginning of that conversation that I think is going to be an ongoing conversation for the next 9 to 10 months between now and the end of the 2026 season. And ultimately, we're going to see where this conversation leads. Again, I know a lot of people hear this as negativity. We're having honest conversations, right? We're serious on this podcast, right? That goes back to that whole Mariota situation where, I got the AKA started because of that summer with Marcus Mariota, where I was basically refused to consider him anything other than a bridge to Desmond Ridder. And a lot of his fans, let's say, people that were bigger fans of Mariota than they were fans of the Atlanta Falcons, said a lot of things, that were not very nice, not very kind to me at the time that about me. And I was like, look, we're serious on this podcast. We're not going to seriously engage with the idea that Marcus Mariota is anything more than a bridge quarterback. And then you can call me Sirius Black, right? Homage to, the Bodega Boys, the most dangerous podcast in the universe, and the AKAs and whatnot. But, I feel like it's a similar conversation with Tua. That's where I'm just like, yeah, like let's not do this, guy. Let's not do this again. We know what he is. It's fine. It's fine. He's a bridge. Nothing wrong with being a bridge. But like, let's get across the bridge as soon as possible. Is kind of where I'm at. But that's kind of how I feel about it. But we'll see how that shapes up over the course of the coming weeks, months, possibly years. And that will be an ongoing conversation, but we'll leave that conversation for the future. We'll finish today's conversation talking about the lack of moves on day 2 of the legal tampering period. And it's due to a lack of funds. And we'll revisit how the Falcons can create more funds to make potentially more moves in the future to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now, since it's March, we know college basketball is nonstop all month long. There are big games, tight spreads, and momentum swings every single night. We got conference tournaments going on all week long. And whether you're watching the games in Charlotte, Nashville, Chicago, or you're a sicko watching those late night shootouts in Boise, there's always some action across the board. And now FanDuel is going to give you a way to turn that energy into bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. You can build any college hoops parlay you want. Rivalry games, ranked matchups, whatever you like. You can mix spreads, totals, and player props to match how you see the slate playing out. And then you can apply a profit boost and instantly bump up the potential payout. Go safe, go bold, ride with the team you've been following all year long, or just jump on a bandwagon with the hottest hand. It's your parlay, your style, and now it has more upside behind it. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. So as we're recording this, the Falcons have made 0 moves on day 2 of the legal tampering period. It's been a fairly quiet day league-wide. Of course, we were in a tizzy because of the Kaden Elliss news that he signed with the New Orleans Saints. We'll potentially be talking about that more on the next episode. But, quiet day, 0 moves on day 2, 8 moves on day 1. And that came at the cost of pretty much the Falcons exhausting all of their potential funds. And I think that's why day 2 has been so quiet, right? Based off of, overthecap.com, I think the Falcons entered the week with about $15 million in cap space. And of those 8 moves, we know of the contract details of 3 of them. That's Jake Bailey, Cameron Thomas, and Jahan Dotson. We can pretty accurately guess the details of 2 more with Austin Hooper and Tua Tagovailoa. And if we are accurate in those guesses, the combined cap space that those guys are counting in 2026 is just shy of $15 million, $14.85 million. So, based off of that, they're done. But there is the top 51 rule to consider. It means that the top 51 rather than the top 53 players on your roster count towards your salary cap during the offseason. Only the 53 count when the regular season starts. And collectively, because of that top 51 rule, rather than $14.85 million, those guys are only counting about $10.4 million against the Falcons cap. And the simple explanation of how it works is, let's say you sign a guy for $5 million against the cap, and your 51st player on your roster before you signed that guy counted $1 million against the cap. So when you sign that $5 million guy, the full $5 million doesn't count because you're bumping $1 million down. And so it only counts $4 million against your cap, right? Because that $1 million guy becomes the 52nd highest paid guy on your roster and no longer counts towards your salary cap. So it's about $10.4 million in spending. So that leaves roughly $4.5 million in cap space for the Falcons to spend. And that doesn't count Nick Folk's contracts, Christian Harris's contracts, and Olamide Zaccheaus' contracts that as of this recording, we haven't seen the full details of that. There has been reports that Folk signed a 2-year, $9 million contract. And I think we can guesstimate that his initial cap hit is somewhere between $3 and $4 million with that type of contract. We'll split the difference and say $3.5 million. Again, we don't know what Harris and OZ's were, but even if they signed veteran minimum deals for $1.2 million, those 3 contracts would add another about $3 million in cap spending. And that would leave you with about $1.5 million in cap space. And so based off of that, with the 8 moves that have been made, the Falcons have essentially exhausted nearly all of their cap space, 90% of their spending limit. And that would essentially probably mean that they're done. It doesn't mean that like there will be zero moves made, but it's pretty much over, right? They've done all the major things that they've done in free agency, right? And I think that's possible, but I think it's doubtful, right? And so, I think what's going to happen, as many of you are listening to this on Wednesday, we're going to find out when the new league year starts that the Falcons have made other roster moves to create more cap space. Whether that's cuts, whether that's restructures, we'll find out. But that's going to get us back to the conversation we had over a week ago where we broke down the Falcons cap situation. And I think the easiest way that the Falcons can create cap space is by cutting Charlie Woerner. That would clear about $4.75 million. And I think that would be more than enough to make sure that all these moves that the Falcons have made so far fit under your salary cap, assuming that the Falcons didn't go out there and spend, more than they spent on Jahan Dotson, on Olamide Zaccheaus, more than they spent on Cameron Thomas, on Christian Harris or whatever. So we'll see on that front. And I think now with Hooper being added, cutting Charlie Woerner is definitely a possibility. It's a possibility I wouldn't be particularly thrilled with. I did Locked On Falcons Insider on Tuesday morning we were talking about this, and it's a great opportunity for you guys to join the Locked On Falcons Insider at the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. 14-day free trial, $4.99 a month, and you can get this conversation roughly 24 hours before you get it on the pod. Right? We can have those conversations. But that Locked On Falcons Insider expressed that they also did not want to see Charlie Woerner get cut, shared that sentiment with me. And basically my response to him was like, yeah, it only makes sense to me if the Falcons go out there in the draft and get a future TE1 in the draft, because if they just wind up cutting Charlie Woerner to make a lateral move for more of a backup blocker role player type of player, that feels pretty pointless to me, right? Basically, if the Falcons draft the next Cade Otton or the next Tucker Kraft or whoever, you like as a mid-round starting caliber tight end, I think Charlie Woerner's sacrifice would be much appreciated to bring in one of those guys. But if you're just going to draft the next Eric Saubert, the next Luke Stocker, the next John Fitzpatrick, I'm just like, what was the point? And obviously, when you draft those guys, you don't know what they're going to turn into, but we'll see. I'll sit here on the podcast and basically express my opinion on what I, knowing what these guys are going to turn into, because, I'm just an expert evaluator. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, you can't see the sarcasm in my face, but, hopefully you can hear it. But, I would much rather see, if the Falcons are going to cut anybody, it would be Clark Phillips, which would free up about $3.6 million. And or Kyle Hinton, which would be about $2.75 million. Those two moves combined will get you to $6.4 million in free cap space, which is, a little bit more, $1.8-ish million more than you would get from Charlie Woerner. And, I remember when we did this breakdown last week, I think I got a comment about, someone asking about, could the Falcons trade Jesse Bates? And trading Jesse Bates would only free up about $6.5 million. So you could get the same cap space by cutting Clark Phillips and Kyle Hinton as you would trading Jesse Bates. So it's not really worth it from a cap standpoint to trade Jesse Bates. And then we just saw with the Minkah Fitzpatrick trade to the Jets, who I think only gave up a 7th round pick for him, for a player that's basically the same age as Jesse Bates and has the same pedigree as Jesse Bates, that you're not going to get as high a pick as I think a lot of people have been speculating for the last 2, 3, 4 months that you could get for Jesse Bates. And so hopefully that kills any talk of trading our beloved, king of of non-monogamy here on the podcast. So we don't have to talk about that ever again, because, we do not believe in monogamy here on the podcast. But if you're new to the podcast, you will not understand that context, but that is specifically for the everydayers. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen so that you can get all these inside jokes that we make on the podcast, all the corny ones. But, the other ways that the Falcons, besides cutting players, the clear up cap space is restructuring contracts. Like the two likeliest guys that I think could get restructured are Chris Lindstrom, A.J. Terrell. Lindstrom would free up about $11 million with a max restructure. Terrell would free up about $10.3 million. As I mentioned on that previous breakdown, I don't expect them to do both of those restructures today. If they do one, they'll just do one and then hold off on the other as a sort of, we might need this money going into the season, and wait till then. But again, as many of you are listening to this on Wednesday, you might already know what those moves are. And basically, if we don't get any announcements on what those moves are in the next 24 to 48 hours, as many of you are listening to this, then it probably does mean that the Falcons are done in free agency and it's on to the draft. And again, doesn't mean that there will be zero other signings between now and the draft, but it will be likely, those type of vet minimum pickups that we've seen the Falcons do in the past when they were limited in cap space in previous off seasons, in late March, early April, guys like Damiere Byrd, guys like James Smith-Williams, those type of moves, rather than any sort of big splashes. Now, I'm sure for those of you new here, you're like, what about cutting Kirk Cousins? He's going to be a post-June 1 cut. That's going to free up some cap space, right? And as we've explained previously, and we'll briefly explain again, a post-June 1 cut doesn't free up any cap space, at least not until June 2nd, right? And cutting Kirk as a post-June 1 cut will save roughly, I think it's like $2.1 million only on June 2nd. You will get those savings on June 2nd. Between now and then, you're not going to save a single dime. And then, the only other thing that we can mention that could potentially free up cap space is a tag and trade of Kyle Pitts. That would free up about $15 million. And so if you want the Falcons to be very proactive in, free agency and go out there and spend big buku bucks, if you're eyeing Trey Hendrickson, because it seems like he's, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like he's kind of the last big free agent that's left available. I could be wrong about that. All the cornerbacks are gone, but if you're out here like we got to get Trey Hendrickson, then you're probably in favor of a tag and trade of Kyle Pitts without knowing that you're in favor of a tag and trade of Kyle Pitts. But we'll see what the Falcons do on that front. If that's going to happen, I said it before, I feel like it needs to happen this week. Like the longer we wait, if we get over the next 3 or 4 days and we don't hear any buzz about a tag and trade with Kyle Pitts, then the odds that it's going to happen dip, as we get further along, because this is the week where teams have the most spending money in order to make that trade possible, right? You need to have at least $15 million in cap space in order to acquire Kyle Pitts. And as we get further along in the offseason, there will be less and less teams that will have that money. And so there will be less and less options in order to trade Kyle Pitts. So that's why we talk about that now, but we'll see. Again, I'm not expecting it, but as I've mentioned several times before, I think it would be a prudent move for the long-term future of the Falcons. But again, I know that's a controversial take, so we won't get into that controversy on today's episode. Instead, we will wrap up today's episode and get to the controversy of Kaden Elliss walking, right? Kaden Elliss, Kentavious Street. Oh, it hurts my heart to see both of these guys out the door, right? Two former Saints that I stand, and one of those, went back to those pesky Saints, and it's breaking my heart. But we'll talk about the departures. We'll talk about the potential comp picks that the Falcons can get back as part of their strategy of Ian Cunningham's to build draft currency on your next episode. And so continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss that. Check out Locked On NFL, Locked On NFL Draft for your second listens if you want to keep up to date with all the things going on in free agency in the NFL, as well as how it impacts the upcoming NFL draft. And of course, make sure you check out the Everydayer Club, right? Free agency is here, and so are we. Get 1 month free of the Everydayer Club with the code free agency, no spaces, through March 15th. Go ad free. Keep this conversation going in the Locked On Podcast Network Discord. All you got to do is join at the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. And of course, if you want to get your Falcons insight, potentially hours earlier than you get on the pod, then become a Locked On Falcons insider at the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com, and you get a 14-day free trial. So 2 weeks of free agency related content, and some upcoming draft content as well for 2 weeks, and then $4.99 a month thereafter. So check them out. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, baby. Your team every day.